I want to thank you for your commitment to covering the Capitol, and thank you to all Idahoans who make Idaho a great place to live, work, play, and raise a family. We have a few brief remarks, and then we'll open up for questions. And we'll be available for questions, and afterwards our colleagues will also be available, so thank you. Year after year, we have spoken at the beginning of legislative sessions and delivered this same message. Our priorities are driven by what Idaho families, workers, businesses, and communities need to prosper. Year after year, our priorities have remained emphatic. Create opportunity for every Idahoan by building a strong business climate and advancing policies that improve pay. Invest in a complete education plan from early childhood through college or professional technical training. Reduce government waste by advancing policies to increase accountability, transparency, and efficiency. Advance common sense solutions to improve our communities, including quality health care for all Idahoans. And protect our public lands legacy so our children and grandchildren can have access that we cherish today. We have consistently asked this question first: is this right for the people of Idaho? Another principle is just as important. If this is the right thing to do, then it's worth doing right. We are slowly emerging from the Great Recession and the Luna laws, yet only a portion of the Education Task Force recommendations have been enacted. We are in the third year of a 5-year plan. At best, if the governor and the politicians were students in a classroom, our teacher would give us an incomplete. Twice in his speech today, the governor proposed getting us to 2009 levels or accomplishing 2009 goals as if it were a laudable achievement. We cannot compete in today's economy if we're still trying to catch up with 2009. Touting modest funding increases as the right path for getting better is not leadership. We believe students in 2016 need funding commensurate with today and not 7 years ago. More school districts than ever are forced to pass supplemental levies to survive. Unfair taxes that residents passed on only to protect their children, and promises made should be promises kept. True leadership would work to correct this unequal education system in Idaho. When it comes to our children's future, it's worth doing it right. We agree and eagerly support the governor's intention to address climate change, cybersecurity, aquifer recharge, and building a 21st century mission for our Air National Guard. Yet our economy needs serious attention because Idaho remains a low-wage state. The governor recognizes that colleges and universities have been suffering since 2008, but recognition is different than leadership. It is critical we help businesses partner with higher education to create a skilled workforce that Idaho needs. We should raise Idaho's minimum wage now. Idahoans deserve a better wage, which help everyone reach economic stability. Currently, 50% of our Idaho college graduates move away from Idaho within 4 years. The reality is that we have created an economy that does not provide Idahoans with the means to care for a family. Idaho business leaders tell us we need to prepare and retain Idahoans. We want them to stay in our communities. Governor Otter only proposed training workers, but his statement lacked any substance as to how to keep those we train in our beautiful state. We believe growing our economy is worth doing right. We support putting money into the pockets of Idahoans, which supports small businesses. Idaho must incentivize businesses to cover education expenses for their employees. Idaho businesses and individuals also need to connect and compete on a global scale through expansion of our state's broadband infrastructure. And Idaho businesses must have first consideration when we're talking about government contracting. Let's build our economy responsibly. We also propose a sunset on all existing tax exemptions so they may be reviewed routinely to measure their effectiveness and necessity. That's what Idahoans want. That's what Idaho Democrats, Democratic lawmakers want. That's what we will work to accomplish.
Thank you, Michelle. When it comes to solving Idaho's problems, we consistently see the same barrier to success. It's not a case of not having the resources, it's a case of putting those resources in the wrong places. For instance, the governor's expensive proposal, which we call Otter Care, fails to give 78,000 Idahoans, including 10,000 veterans, the medical care they need. In essence, the proposal provides a few doctor visits, but does not support services that will likely cause severe financial hardship. His plan omits hospital care, emergency medical transportation, cancer care, expensive prescriptions, and mental health care, which is particularly harmful to our veterans and the families dealing with PTSD. Under Otter Care, some Idahoans would have to drive over 50 miles to get an approved doctor, and the coverage will be sparse. To add to this, Otter Care comes at triple the price. First, by refusing a full-service Medicaid plan, we pay federal taxes for a benefit Idaho does not receive. Second, we continue to pay local taxes to the CAT Fund for indigent care. And third, Otter Care adds on another $30 million public expenditure. Additionally, we point out that after much fanfare and excitement, the plan appears to be so faulty, it was left out of his State of the State address. We believe that it is long past time to fix our broken system that has wasted millions of Idaho's tax dollars. In recent years, we've spent millions on contracts for private prisons, school internet, and other poorly executed government spending projects. Atop that, Idaho squanders millions a year on state and outside lawyers to defend unconstitutional legislation. That is not right. And in his speech, the governor spoke of its value. If he had used his resources wisely, the fund would not be empty and without a winning record. This year, we will propose an improvement to that fund, an Office of Inspector General, where complaints can be investigated and contracts can be reviewed. Time and time again, Idahoans have told us they want to stamp out waste and corruption in our state government. We agree this is something worth doing right. Together and individually, Idaho Democratic legislators will work to improve the health, safety, and prosperity of all Idaho workers, families, businesses, and communities. This session, we will actively be working on our top issues, which include the following: a better health care plan than Otter Care, protecting our access to public lands, fully investing in education to 2016 levels, promoting good government, protecting Idahoans from criminals, promoting a strong economic environment in our state, struggling to see that no person suffers from the indignity of discrimination, increasing the minimum wage, making higher education more affordable, and we look forward to working with the governor and our peers across the aisle, and we are serious about tackling the problems that exist today. We promise we will be tough but fair and tough means that we will hold the governor and the legislature to this simple standard. If it's the right thing to do, then it's worth doing right. Thank you.
You mentioned that one of your priorities is working on a better healthcare plan than Otter Care, as you put it. Is your goal to expand Medicaid, or do you have another proposal?
Our belief is that Medicaid redesign is the appropriate method to cover the people in the gap. It's the most affordable, it'll save Idahoans tax dollars, and it will give them coverage that will help them avoid financial bankruptcy. And that's what we should be doing for Idahoans that work hard for their families.
So will you have a bill that would expand?
Our plan is to propose a bill, yes.
Do you know about when that would be?
I don't want to get into timelines, Melissa, you know.
The majority party likes to put deadlines on things. We're here
Right.
to do the job, so
Yeah.
not try to do it fast.
Representative Berkeley, you and Senator Stinnett both talked about how returning education funding to 2009 levels may be inappropriate. What advice would you give to the governor or your colleagues on JFAC about what appropriate education funding levels are for 2016 here in Idaho? How do we determine that?
We just mentioned that it's insufficient. That bringing it back should not be our goal. In the last 2 years, we've been talking about bringing up to 2009 levels. At some point, we have to be talking beyond that. And to be competitive, we have to plan for that. I just haven't heard much talk about what 2016 looks like. If we're really planning, if this is a 5-year plan and we're in our 3rd year, what are we going to do in the next 2 years that brings it up to speed? And so I just feel like there's a lot at stake economically, a lot at stake for our kids and their education to be able to be competitive, and it's something that we need to be doing quicker.
Absolutely.
What's going on with Happy Words in that debate?
That we continue to stand strong, that discrimination is inappropriate in Idaho, and that this is a discussion that we need to continue to press.
Are you proposing any legislation?
Well, I know that the Pro Tem had mentioned when we were before you last week that they are working on something. I haven't seen the language, but I stand the same as I did then to say that the state constitution says that all Idahoans should be treated the same under the law, and that's pretty simple. And so I think that should be for everyone equally, all Idahoans. And I hope whatever they're discussing, that they keep that in mind.
And he did pitch it as a compromise bill,
Which means
Yeah.
that if you compromise something, you're not treating everybody equally.
So you have
and we haven't seen it.
any more details? Okay.
Yeah.
You're talking about sunsetting all tax incentives. How much money would that be in total, and what impact would that have on the
Was the
economy?
price tag on
I
that?
think the
It was in
bigger,
In the billions.
it's in the
of
billions. But the
Um,
bigger issue with sunsetting taxes is not ending them, but bringing them upon
Review.
and forward for review every 4 or 5 years to really have a conversation is this adding to our economy? Is this creating a modern 21st century economy?
Is it necessary? Is it efficient? And there's plenty we haven't seen in decades that need to be readdressed. And if we do that thoughtfully, we can probably bring quite a bit of revenue to, or at least bring it up to speed if it needs to be, have some kind of modification. But it's something we haven't done in quite a while, and we should.
Is there legislation attached to this, or is this just kind of an idea?
We have legislation that we're working on in draft format.
You mentioned the governor, you agree with the governor on his plan to address greenhouse gases. The only thing I saw him talk about greenhouse gases was nuclear power.
We didn't talk about greenhouse gases. We talked about environmental sustainability, which is what he did say in his address today. And that is a broad spectrum. But anything that's talking about making sure that clean air, clean water, and the health and safety of Idahoans is part of the conversation, and we should be seriously addressing that. And that can be on a lot of different levels of what sustainability looks like.
You said that the governor's proposal for education and bringing things back to the 2009 level is not enough. He's proposing a 7.9% increase in general funding for schools next year. What kind of increase would you support?
I would support moving forward with an appropriate health care plan. And if you're going to allocate additional resources or additional public expenditures like he's proposed through Otter Care, let's apply that to education and move us closer to the modern day, not in 2009.
But how much do you think school funding really needs to go up?
That's a good question, because when you think about the unequalized levies that are happening across the state, they're on the rise. In fact, they're continuing to increase. If our goal and our Constitution requires us to provide an equal access to free schools, then these unequalized levies are not helping that. So if we're truly going to reach levels that we need, then we need to eliminate those unequalized levies.
And that price tag is all over. You'd have to add up what all school districts are paying for in their levies to understand that we've placed an added burden on them. It's our responsibility under the Constitution to be doing that job, not the local communities.
Representative Berkeley, you got a bill to increase the minimum wage introduced last session. First question is there another introduction plan and for a bill similar like that? And if so, what rate would you like it to be at? I know there's a big push across the nation to do $15 an hour. Would it be similar to that, or would it be closer to your phased-in, less aggressive plan from last year?
Thanks, Dustin. That's a good question. We do have a similar bill to last year, and we consistently see across the state that Idahoans generally support a phased-in approach to the minimum wage. And so we have not changed any of our approach in terms of how we're advancing the idea of the minimum wage. And really the idea is to raise the minimum wage to a point that an Idahoan can get off of government services. I believe that economic stability and economic security is critically important to having a happy, healthy life. And so we're not pushing minimum wage beyond what we did last year.
Thank you.
You mentioned an Office of the Inspector General proposal. Can you expand on that a little bit about how big do you see this office being, how many positions, estimated cost?
You know, I'd actually, if I could, not comment on that until the plan for the Office of the Inspector General is Representative Rushi is the total lead on that, and he's still working on it. And so I'd like to wait until Representative Rushi's back in the beginning of February.
Is there a democratic plan on how to deal with our public defense system? Or, and we've heard a lot of plans coming out of this committee. Is there consensus within your party on how we should deal with this?
Well, I think what we all agree on is what, and I think the governor mentioned this earlier today, was that it's a larger, it took a lot more time to figure out all the nuts and bolts of what's needed to improve the system. And so a lot of the time was, where do we put those thresholds of giving public defenders equal amount of subpoena power and equal amount of information, and so that there's parity for both sides when they go in front of public defense. Obviously, we can't offer everything that a paid defendant could, but where are those thresholds that are reasonable? And I think they finally nailed those down in the public, and I'm not on that particular interim committee, and so we feel like it's required of us by a court order to make an improvement. And I think a lot of us will go with some of the recommendations once we hear what is proposed out of the interim committee, but it's something that we're at least clear on and we have some direction to go with. Beyond that, I think we have to hear from them and then formulate some way that we can make sure that it's supportable when we get it together.
So are the Democrats satisfied with the appointments that the governor has got, that there is the fair amount of Democrat to Republicans on state panels like the Public Utilities Commission and Fish and Game and things like that?
Do I think that's ever a fair amount of appointments? I would love to see more Democrats being appointed to positions that, and the PUC would have been a great place to do that. It's a political appointment, and we keep pushing our best and brightest to be in those positions, but in the end it is the governor's selection. But I would hope that we would have more parity on that. I also question, once we change the laws where people have to sign up for party for primaries, we have a lot of independence in our structure, in our agencies, and independent is not recognized as a party in this state. And so I have asked the Secretary of State more than once, is that legal that we have people who declare themselves a party that the state doesn't even recognize? And we're talking about a committee or an agency having to, particularly our commissions, having to have some kind of parity on it. And I've never gotten a very straight answer, but it's true. We have to be a lot clearer about what's in statute and whether we're honoring them.
So is this an issue worth a lawsuit over? If you're not getting anything from the Secretary of State and the governor, and
I'd prefer to sit down and talk to them before a lawsuit.
Well, I'm just asking. It seems to me that it's been pretty obvious
Yeah,
that
well,
they've been dissing you for years.
it's certainly worth much more discussion, and I agree with you.
Prior to the start of this year's session, Representative Rushi had some choice words for the governor's health proposal and said he thought it was a poor second choice. But he also said that as a physician, he thought that clinically it was better than nothing. Is the position that you are taking today as a caucus that you will oppose this, even if it means that we get nothing?
Well, I haven't actually seen the entire plan aside from what the governor mentioned last week, and so I can't speak to the nuts and bolts of it. But if all it does is give basic primary, your first walk in to see if I can take care of you on today's visit, but anything beyond that, you're going to have to pay for prescriptions or more advanced care, I'm not sure how helpful that's going to be, and that'll have to be part of the discussion. I like that we're finally talking about it. I mean, it takes people dying on front pages of your papers for somebody to have a conversation about that. But at least we're having they haven't wanted, we have been bringing it forward for the last 3 years, and nobody on the other side has ever mentioned anything about it. because there was no political will. I am just grateful that we're talking about it because it's long overdue.
Like I said, we haven't seen any legislation on it. Based on what he proposed, if it's worth doing, this isn't the right way to do it. But I can't comment on what the caucus will do in terms of a vote until we've seen legislation.
In this regard, we've heard the governor say that they're really actively seeking an Idaho solution as opposed to expanding Medicaid from a federal standpoint. Is this, what's your view on a state?
Well, he was very
effort?
clear in both last week and today, or when, particularly last week when he spoke about it, that there is no ability in the legislature to do anything differently. He just doesn't have the votes to do anything other than what he's doing. Is that right? Is that how we're going to handle it? Because we should be having a much better conversation about it. But he chose to do that because it was the easiest way to do it.
This goes into the larger of we want an Idaho solution for the Real ID Act. And so what it sounds to me is whenever we disagree with something, we try to come up with an Idaho solution that's just really expensive. And this plan is really expensive for very, very little.
Speaking of Real ID, are you going to bring that up this year, given that our...
Again, Idaho's national reputation, a lot of my work, the job that I do for a living, requires me to travel through the Boise airport. If we don't have a discussion about the Real ID, and now suddenly Idahoans, especially Boiseans and other people who come to Boise to fly out of the airport, if we don't have IDs and we have to use passports, it seems to me that we have set ourselves up to, again, just be outside of the main United States population, which I'm very proud to be a U.S. citizen. And I think if we don't have Real ID, then what we've done is created an economic hindrance for ourselves.
Thank you.
Are
Yeah.
you guys feeling good today? I mean, a major increase to higher ed, K through 12, no major tax cuts. Are you guys happy with what you heard?
It is we've all decided that, and I'm happy to see that education is our first responsibility, and we'll put as much resources as we possibly can to it. I think we can all be in agreement about a good plan. We have differences about where we'd like to head with it, but this is certainly a good budget for both, and I was pleased to see the higher education component to it. We're around if you want to ask more questions.
Thank you.
And we'll be dispensing this electronically, so you guys will have it. We had too short a time to get it.